Hello and welcome from, I guess, myself, Chicago, a little out of place, as you can tell from the background. But we are celebrating episode 37 of, I believe, 43 of the CIS and Senteon webinar series, breaking down the OS hardening CIS benchmarks for Windows workstations and Windows servers. We will have more episodes after 43 when we get into the wonderful, wonderful world of browser hardening.
Good stuff. So much content, so much information. I love it.
Yep. And one preview thing of something you may see coming from the Senteon channels, a lot of this content, we are actively working to break them up into like 30 to 60-second reels where when you look up a specific setting, you can hear the explanation as opposed to scanning through the 60-minute webinar. So a lot of good things coming. The feedback's been great on the episode, so please keep it coming and thank you for attending. But we are joined today by JD of Essential IT Services, business owner, top tier in the Robbins group. I got to meet him in person. Absolute blast and easy to talk to. So, JD, I mean, thank you for coming on. Thank you for being excited about this. I know our pre-show is like this webinar culture is just taking charge and getting onto this. We always have our jitters and adrenaline, but thanks for stepping outside of your comfort zone, joining us in what's slowly becoming our comfort zone. But JD, please take a minute, introduce yourself and what Essential IT Services does.
Great. Hey, thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here, and I am excited about the opportunity being here today. Essential IT Services is located in Wichita, Kansas. We outsource IT services to small and medium-sized businesses, some SMEs around the state mostly, but we're really kind of a regional player.
Is that helpful? Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but is that helpful kind of segmenting to a specific area you can really physically reach? Does that you feel that like that's an advantage for you versus MSPs who really say I'm all over the US?
I think there is some advantage to that, especially here in the Midwest. Companies in the Midwest are a little more old school,
Yeah.
kind of want to see people face to face,
Mhm.
build a relationship with people.
It's important.
And I'm not wanting to say anything bad about big companies. Big companies provide great services, but they don't always provide the personal services that we can provide.
It's a lot like where I live in upstate New York. There's, decent sized companies, but they definitely look to local providers in a lot of ways. So it's a great model.
That is really cool. And sorry to interrupt, but you said, work with mostly SMB, some SMEs. Please expand on kind of your differentiator as an MSP.
Sure, sure. So, our real claim to fame has always been that we have focused on productivity and efficiency and ultimately profitability for our customers. We've always wanted to make sure that IT was a tool and a resource that was utilized to the benefit of business growth of our customers. Of course, in today's landscape, you have to throw in an element of cybersecurity and protecting that wealth, because certainly there are a lot of bad actors out there who want to take that wealth
Don't
away.
stop.
Yeah, and were you one of the many MSPs who really started as the traditional break fix printer setup? And I'm not saying you don't do that anymore, but really have matured and transitioned to offer cyber as something newer, or is this something you've been in for decades?
Well, so as far as a moniker and hanging out a shingle, so to speak, and saying we're a cybersecurity company, that's something we've probably been doing for about 4 or 5 years. But the reality is the basics of cybersecurity, the basic tools, antivirus, backups, strategies for remediation and that type of thing, understanding business risk has always been a core function of what we've done.
And
Awesome.
I love, well, one, you use the word basics because you are one of the more mature MSPs where you care about CIS, you care about these fundamentals that we talk about week after week. Me and Rich preach this as loud as we can. One day we'll even have a bigger platform. We'll get louder and maybe a little bit
We're
more
working on it.
persistent, right? Annoying is not the right word, but I want to go back to it was interesting. You brought up the productivity for your end clients. You want to show them the efficiency. So is this talking about like implementing automation to existing workflows that they have? Like, could you translate to me or explain to me, like, I don't know the space, like how does an MSP create more productivity in their end client?
So I think at the very basis of that is things have to function. If your network doesn't work properly, if your computers and their applications don't function properly, then your users, your employees are never productive. So at the very basic level, you have to provide a certain amount of technical support, and you have to be able to get those networks integrated and running properly. After that, then you start focusing on things like lowest total cost of ownership. So in other words, do I buy a cheap computer from Best Buy that has a 1-year warranty, or do I buy a more business class computer, right, that is going to last a little bit longer? We have less interruptions because we don't have to swap out a new PC every 18 months or something like that. Once you start to achieve those, and then you have that baseline established, now you can really start looking at that each customer's or each company's strategic focus, and then you begin to create an IT strategy that aligns with their corporate strategy, and you begin to find technological solutions that allow them to engage into those goals and to become more productive in managing those processes.
JD, let me ask you this. Do you see as an outcome of your services new opportunities that organizations are able to go after?
Absolutely. Now, we don't personally focus on those opportunities for them. What we do is focus on the underlying tools in the background.
You're the enabler.
We help them free up their resources and their brain power, if you will, to focus on new opportunities for them. And then they can feel comfortable knowing that when they bring on new opportunities, new revenue streams, the underlying technology is going to be there to support those processes.
And they can scale, and you're there with them.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
That is really good. And one of the different things you said, which I think is a goal, and I don't think it's said the way you introduced it, but you said you make sure that IT aligns with the corporate strategy. A lot of our guests here always say they want to become Rich. What's the word? Like I know it's consultant.
Trusted advisor.
Trusted advisor. Yeah, I knew you'd know it. You're much better at remembering the buzzier words than me. I always in one ear out the next. But we've talked about that quite a bit on this show, and let me just present to you the timeline of what I really took away from your response. You really help the end client set up their foundation, set up their automation, get them efficient. And then it sounds like you're building up to be this trusted advisor or partner where you are helping future initiatives, the IT initiatives, align with the corporate strategy. So when you work with your end client, are you sitting with them at the table like, hey, introduce to me what your corporate strategy is? What is your 5-year, 10-year plan? Like, how involved are you in that respect?
Sorry, for most customers, we are very much involved in that. So, of course, not every customer desires that level of service.
Sure.
But for those that do, we have routine meetings, sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly.
Wow.
And we definitely discuss exactly those topics.
That is really cool.
That's awesome. And that's where that local relationship really comes in handy too, right? Where you can dedicate that time and do the face-to-face meetings and, sort of be there on demand when necessary is really nice.
Certainly.
Yep. And I want to go a little bit more into this process to get to that point. So something we did talk about in the pre-show was this hammer on education. You shared with me, you never want to force or really make a customer feel like they have to do something or you'll abandon them, right? It's not that type of mentality from what you were describing. So tell me a little bit more about why you prioritize education and for the scope of the webinar, right? Prioritize education on cybersecurity and how that might contribute to you earning that seat at the table.
Sure. So I think at the root of that is an understanding that every company is unique and every company has unique goals and unique ambitions. And to think that I could come in, even in the role of trusted advisor, and be able to make a decision on your behalf that would be better than a decision that you could make yourself is crazy. I mean, it's just, it's
You're
arrogant.
taking yourself too seriously at that point.
Absolutely. So we tell customers and prospective customers from the very outset that there is a servant in our relationship, and we are the servants, right? We make no mistakes about that. Our job is to provide information to decision makers so that they can make informed decisions, informed business decisions about what they want to do with technology or what they want to do with cybersecurity and how they want to mitigate or manage cybersecurity risks. And then we tell them it's your turn, right? Now they have the hard job. They have to actually make the decision.
Well,
Right?
let's face it, JD. People don't have you're going to come up with identifiable risk and present that back to senior management. Small and medium businesses don't always have the funds to fix those 5 items all at once. So you need to help them prioritize and help them sort of best mitigate those risks that are present until the best solutions can be put in place. Correct?
Certainly. We try to communicate to our customers that cybersecurity is a journey. It's not a destination. You
Love
can't
that.
just buy a better antivirus tool or buy a better firewall
Boom.
and be secure or be compliant.
Nailed
And
it.
so, go ahead.
No, he was saying you nailed it. I mean, we agree with
Yeah,
everything you're saying here.
Yep.
That's really good. And I want to go into what Rich said. Rich said, prioritize this list. When you have these conversations and you said informed business decision. When I hear informed business decision, in this scope, I feel like you're listing out risks that they either need to accept or potentially spend money towards to mitigate the risk of, hence informed business decision. So when Rich put in the word prioritized list, are you really examining all the layers of security, comparing those security layers to what they do, and then a customized, tailored risk registry, right? Prioritize list for them to review? Like, is it that intense? Because that sounds like it could take a lot of time.
It can take a lot of time. A proper level 2 cybersecurity assessment takes hours and hours to perform.
Mm-hmm.
And the bigger the organization, the more time that it takes. There's a tremendous amount of data collection that is involved to collect the right information, the right documents, the right policies, and then try to sort through those and come up with some list of priorities.
JD, can you talk more about that? It sounds like, is that a standard offering per se? The security assessment you just kind of described. Talk more about that if you can. It sounds very valuable.
So we have a couple of different layers of assessments depending upon where the customer is on that path, on that cybersecurity journey. Some are, we have a level 1 assessment that's fairly light, maybe takes 20 minutes, gives us a baseline feel for where a company is at on that path. And then we have a more substantial level 2 assessment that is pages and pages of questions that focus on the customer's operations and policies and procedures. And we don't really give them the answers, but we tell them how to rank their answers. What's the probability that something bad would happen, and then what would be the side effect, right, or what would be the consequence if something negative happened.
So this sounds like an in-house form that you guys created. Is that fair to say? I mean, leveraged maybe, Google searches, created forms, but you tailored this to what you wanted. Is that fair to say?
We have done some tailoring. We didn't author all of the material. We have some really good vendors out there that provide some materials for us, and then we modify those.
Sure.
And even on every single customer, we would probably take a look at what questions we're asking and why.
I got to ask the question, JD, what role do the CIS controls and the CIS benchmarks play?
So for me, these are the beginning parts of the journey. The benchmarks and the the recommendations that are in the benchmark. These are the most basic level of things that need to be done. And they're really great because sometimes customers will, especially smaller customers, will say, well, we don't really have a large budget. We don't think we can afford to do something. And that's when we try to explain to them, cybersecurity is a journey. Not everything costs money. Many of the things that are on the benchmarks can be done for free. Of course, Senteon has a great tool that helps you automate that process and is good for the MSPs that are listening today. You might really want to seriously look at that tool.
I appreciate the shout out, but I do want to emphasize very much. And Felicia King was a guest I guess a couple months back now. It's been a minute, but
we gotta get her back. We need.
Yeah, she'll come back whenever. She's really happy, especially with the real content that we're going to start releasing. She's been part of that creation process, so she'll be around. But I want to go into what you said because it relates to what Felicia said. She referenced the community defense model. Is that the right CDM? Yep. Is that it, Rich? Yep.
Yeah. CIS has published what we call the community defense model, which are kind of patterns and best practices that small and medium businesses can follow.
But the really cool thing here is they mapped the controls to MITRE and listed out in a segment the top 5 things you can do, or the top 5 controls to meet that mitigate, I forget the exact percentage, but mitigate like 80% of your risk, right? Yeah. Whatever that is. And Felicia emphasized, again, obviously there's tools like Senteon that automate the remediation of settings, but realistically, if it is a strapped for cash end client that can't afford to pay an extra couple dollars per seat, whatever that is, if there's a way to do it in-house, you may have the tools available. Now the question becomes, is it going to cost me more in labor to manually do it, or that $2 more seat with Senteon or any other XYZ solution going to be less than the labor? And that sounds like a challenge MSPs have to confront quite often. I mean, I guess I'll ask the question since you're here, JD. Like, do you ever get into the question of saying, hey, Mr. Customer or Mr. Prospect, we have a new opportunity to work with this vendor who can automate this layer of security. They're going to cost X amount more per seat, but if you don't do this, we still need to do this layer. It's not changing the fact that we don't need to do this. We still need to do it, but it's going to cost X amount more in labor for us to do that. Like, do you present the options, or is it more you inform them of your choice?
Most of the time we start out with just educating the customer on the benefits of what needs to be done. And we try to do that at the business level and explain why these things are a benefit to their business, or why not doing these things could be detrimental to their business.
The risk.
Certainly incremental pricing is always going to come in play. I mean, money is always an issue.
Sure.
I've yet to meet that one customer that just signs a blank check for $1 billion and lets everything.
They're out there, JD. Don't
give up faith, right? But, money is always an issue, and certainly for us being productive and efficient in-house, right, is also something that's important for us to demonstrate to our customers. Not only do we preach that for them, but we preach that for ourselves as well.
I think that's really important.
Zach, I had an opportunity to head out to Las Vegas last week.
Right, a boom. That's right.
To the MSP focused conference called Right of Boom. I think Andrew Morgan sets that up and did a really great job. It was a wonderful event, and CIS had a presentation in conjunction with Blackpoint on the pre-day that was really well attended. Phyllis Lee presented the CIS controls, sort of, kind of the origin and purposes and things like that. And I had a chance to meet with many of our current partners that were there at the conference. Many partners will integrate our tech into their solutions, much like Senteon, which was awesome to see those people. And one of the things that was interesting is some people are actually taking that community defense model that we publish, and people can leverage as with their customers to help communicate and use some of those artifacts that present risk, and how, chasing after those top 5 will really, really help out, because those are tests. Those risks aren't just, something we pulled off from Google, as Zach likes to bring up. These are tested, based upon actual incidents in our work with, places like MITRE and so forth. So, you can even use those artifacts in your discussions with customers, to help drive home those points, because it is from a trusted third-party source, namely the Center for Internet Security.
And to expand on that, again, on the road. So the reason I'm not calling from my usual background, I'm actually in Chicago here for CompTIA's CCF event. And
Yeah.
talking about the CDM model you guys released, one thing CompTIA does, and maybe this is a real-time suggestion, because the audience did seem to really appreciate it, is most of the CompTIA information they release, like the 2024 threat report, they allow for co-branding to empower that MSP to not only say, hey, here's a third party, this third party is okay with my logo right there with it, right? So really building that credibility and
Generally,
leveraging those.
from a CIS perspective, to really have the ability to do that is, you do need a membership to really incorporate our IP into your selling practices, and anything that would be considered commercial use. But your man's here. I can help you out with that. Now's a great time to join CIS and support us as well. We have promotions going on currently. If anyone is listening and wants to buy a membership, I'm your guy.
Awesome. All right, let's get back, JD. We're at about the 20-minute mark, so I just have a couple more questions. And before we went on some segues of how awesome Right a Boom, CompTIA CFF, and we were talking about the concept of money, and money is always going to be a challenge. Nothing we can avoid. But what would you say to like the business owner, the manager you're working with, who says like, I can't afford cybersecurity? And I mean, I can't imagine that's something you've gotten before.
We get that question a lot, or complaint a lot, as the case may be.
True.
But one of the first things to come back with is, of course, the reality is, first of all, no matter, before you even bring out your checkbook or we even start talking about dollars and cents, the real first concept that you have to consider is, can you afford not to do something on
basic business continuity, right?
Absolutely. We also we have something like the CDM model that we have developed on our own. We have 5 or 6 points, and I'm sure that something like 2-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is something that's on your list. Sure. I'm sure it's on every list in the world. And we start off when we talk about those things, and we say, not everything costs more money in cybersecurity. And if you remember that cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination, and that you're just going to walk down a path and take the steps you can take today and plan for the steps that you need to take tomorrow. So we can do things like set some of the benchmarks. We can enable multi-factor authentication. You can buy better computers that are going to last a little bit longer, and then keep them up to date, like on modern operating systems, and keep them patched, things like that. So not everything costs money. Of course, there are things that do cost money, and there's no denying that.
Yeah, tiny bit further, even in this educational series, Zach and I, through guests like yourself, JD, have exposed many opportunities to use built-in Microsoft features for relatively good defense. By enabling the right settings, you can get kind of more mileage out of your operating system just by proper settings.
Yeah, and that's something that's actually some of our most viewed episodes are talking about those next generation GPOs. We've had Roddy on talk about virtualization. Man, I'm blanking, but I think there's 3 next generation categories that we've talked about that are just, the guest speaker wasn't even aware of it when they wanted to join the show. So there's some prep work that goes into these GPOs, and that's another one of my personal favorite things. Senteon changes 1,300 settings. I don't expect JD, I don't expect Roddy or any guest who come, maybe Felicia, to be an expert in 1,300 settings. I expect you to potentially do a Google search. you know.
No, and at a certain point, it becomes mental baggage, right? You don't
Hmm.
want to remember 1,300 settings. That's what we do. We have
Yep.
it at your back. It's already written down. You don't need to remember it.
So, in your answer, you mentioned the cost of cybersecurity. We don't have the money. You said very quickly, we informed them, can they afford not to care? How do you get that customer to switch their frame of mindset to say, oh, I mean, can I not afford to do this? How do you put that in front of them? That sounds like a hard switch.
Well, first of all, I don't think I have any magic tools, and I don't have any superpowers that
Come
allow
on,
me to flip any
JD.
switches in anybody's minds. But I think that there is a certain amount of research that goes into this education we do. It's what you just alluded to, Zach.
Hmm.
And when you work with industry professionals like CIS, and you bring in benchmarks and you show them, right, these are the statistics. Here's the CDM. This is what trusted third party groups think about these topics. And here are the staggering statistics. Like last year in 2023, there were
Rough.
some 8,250,000,000 records of data, right, that
It
were
sounds
leaked
horrible, but
in
guess where how the trend
cybersecurity
line
hacks,
goes. It's gonna be worse
Yep.
next year.
right? 8 billion leaks last year of personal information that was obtained through cybersecurity hacks or viruses and that type of event. So when people become educated about those and then become educated about where the path is and where their point is on that path and what they can do, they will naturally gravitate towards taking the steps that they can realistically take.
And JD, what you're describing is a process. That is a
Absolutely.
process. It takes time and patience in education, and it's not a Zoom call. It's an effort, right?
Hmm. It's not
Absolutely. And I
one
think that's
Zoom
again
call.
part of that advantage we talked about in the beginning with having that face to face relationship and knowing your customers personally, or
Yep.
being able to say things like, my first business customer from 1998 is still my customer today and still writes rave reviews about
That's
us.
That's
amazing.
solid. Not
That
many people
really
can say
is.
that. That's awesome.
Give Senteon 20 more years, and I'll be able to say that. We just got to exist a little.
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
last question before we jump into these slides. Again, we want to do the first 30 minutes, just kind of industry updates, banter. But the education portion is coming up. And my kind of high level, we're going to kick off the slides with the MITRE attack technique slides to talk about some of these specific attacks that an attacker might use, and the CIS benchmarks help mitigate. But that's quite the technical conversation. At a high level going into this, what would you say is like the biggest problem confronting business owners today in the terms of cybersecurity?
I think that the problem is kind of twofold. I think the first part of the problem is that a lot of business owners and managers, when they hear the word cybersecurity, they think IT, and so they think tools,
And money.
firewalls, antiviruses, that type of thing. But I also think that the second part of that problem is that people miscategorize cybersecurity. At its base level, the thing that I think we need to remember about cybersecurity is that there are criminals. These are not bad actors, white hats, black hats, red hats. These are bad actors, or these are criminals, right, who are incredibly good at using technology to steal from people.
Off the shelf technology.
And they are clever about the ways they go about doing that. And it is impossible to predict the next thing that's going to happen. And so if you look at this problem as an IT issue or a tool issue, you're never going to get ahead of the game and you're always going to be vulnerable.
So well said.
That was really well said. And the thing I do want to say, you can't predict the threats that are coming, the new ones, right? And that's, you use the word
There's
proactive.
more.
I mean,
There's more one day events
yeah,
occurring. 1 day events are now a thing, and there's more of those happening now. The frequency of those right now are greater than ever.
And just to capitalize on that proactive piece of it, I mean, these CIS benchmarks are literal proactive recommendations that all of us can do to our Windows, well, any type of machine. CIS has an array of recommendations, but for the scope of this, you can change on your workstations today, and it's going to mitigate the risk of the next 0 day, the next 1 day of even being successful, right? It's mitigating that risk and being proactive. So very well put. Let's put a bow on that first half and let's get to some learning. So moderator in the background, let's open up the first MITRE technique slide. We're going to be diving into some of these settings that affect widgets, Windows Defender Smart Screen, I believe, is in this episode. But just to kick off, JD, if you don't mind, just, when a bad actor gets into an environment, I mean, impairing defenses, like that is intuitively makes sense just by the name of the attack technique, but why would an attacker want defenses to go down once they get into that system or as they're trying to get into that system?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Could you just kind of introduce why an attacker wants these like defenses to become impaired, or like how does that make that having open GPOs or default GPOs, how that makes it easier for an attacker to do what they want?
Okay, so the first thing is that whenever someone hacks into your network or launches a virus into your network and starts to attack you, the process is not really like throwing an on-off switch. You don't just open a door and I've got access to everything. It's really better described as peeling the layers off of an onion, right? So one thin layer at a time. If I can get a toehold somewhere and I can exploit one vulnerability, I might be able to prosecute that vulnerability and exploit another vulnerability. And if I can exploit another one and another one and another one, then I can do some serious damage. I can get a real hold on your network.
Yeah, because it's just
Daisy
that
chain effect.
the chain effect, exactly. The blast
Yeah.
radius, as we talk
Yep.
about quite a few times.
Right.
Another one on here, just hiding artifacts. Could you just kind of introduce, why an attacker wants to, maybe hide what they're doing?
Of course, they want to obfuscate their actions. They don't want to trip your antivirus software. They don't want to trip any of your cybersecurity tools. They want to be clandestine and working in the background until they've harvested whatever it was they approached your network to try to harvest.
Yeah. And then I guess we have about, I think, 11 settings today. So we'll just call out one more of these, modify authentication process. A lot of these GPOs are going to force the bad actor to make sure they take the secure authentication process, making their automated attacks or even manual attacks more difficult. So, by modifying that, what does that allow the attacker to do?
If they can modify it, then it allows them to be more powerful, right? If they can escalate permissions, or if they can change what they're allowed to do, then they can do more.
Yep. And I guess just to kind of circle back to the education, since that's very much important to you with your end client prospects, do you say privilege escalation to your end clients? Do you talk about these topics?
I do talk about these topics to my clients at various levels, and sometimes I don't use all the same words, but yes, I do talk about them.
Depends on the audience, right? If you're talking,
Absolutely.
yeah.
That
Good.
makes sense. All right, let's go ahead and go on over. We can highlight this next slide here, but Rich, really quick, I love giving you your chance. Why do we care about CIS benchmarks?
Well, the CIS benchmarks are they're your friend, and what the Center for Internet Security does, kind of how we create our benchmarks is with a community consensus process. So we work with the vendor that we create benchmarks for many different technologies. We're focused on specific ones today, but what we do in general is we work with the vendor and come up with a draft on what we think the appropriate security settings are. That would, and our goal is focusing on that MITRE attack framework. We're testing our settings against the most common threats to really produce the best product for organizations to follow. And what we do is we organize a group of worldwide experts that contribute, and we bring them to consensus. So it's not just CIS in the vendor; it's worldwide experts like JD and Zach and others that also contribute. And what you'll find in the benchmarks are the most secure settings while giving you maximum usability for your experience in applying the CIS benchmark settings.
Yep. And to elaborate a little bit on that maximum experience, they do break it up into levels. So for the scope of this presentation today, I believe these are all level 1, and these should just be no-brainers that ideally the end client doesn't even notice, but if they do notice, it's been deemed so basic, so rudimentary that if it causes them to do one extra click, it's worth it to have
Right
them
on,
do one
Zach.
extra
Yeah,
click.
all of the CIS benchmark level 1 settings are designed to have minimal or no impact on system. Oftentimes, it will improve system performance,
Yep.
but not have
This first
impact
setting
on
here is
user
probably going to talk
operation
towards
in
that
general.
too, right? So let's go ahead and highlight this first setting with that perfect segue, Rich. I think you maybe even did that on accident, but allowing widgets, CIS recommends not to do that. So first, really quick, obviously educational. What the hell's a widget, right? Everyone says widget. What's a widget? Is this the taskbar? Is this just explain what this is and then why CIS recommends not to allow it? JD, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that wasn't directed at Rich.
Nope.
So these are, you can see these on your smartphones, you see them on your PCs. These are little things that pop up and tell you what's happening in the stock market today, or breaking news, or what's the weather outside. So they're just little bitty snippets that pop open little tiny windows and give you information. I think a lot of people love these little things. Obviously, that's why they're so popular. But I think at the end of the day, the problem is that they're maybe just not suitable for work. What's happening on the stock market, unless you're a stockbroker, right? You probably don't need to see that during your normal workday. And the biggest reason for that is probably just a productivity issue. Anything that takes you away from the work that you were concentrating on is a distraction, and it probably reduces productivity.
And a lot of these recommendations are to control productivity, right? It's as an MSP or even as the internal IT department in some cases for the listeners, right? You want control of that business computer. If it's a personal device, maybe you have to be a little bit more lenient, but that business computer, is there a scenario where that end client goes, hey, I want to accept that risk because I can't go without knowing the immediate stock trade? Like, would you push back on that, or do you just say, hey, okay, like, I just want you to know this is the risk? Like, is it that pushback type of thing you'll deal with?
That pushback happens a lot, and it especially happens at the top of the C-suite, and it happens at the business owner level. Usually, again, if we go back to the very beginning of our conversation, we explained what we did. We said, my role as an educator, my role is to provide information, not to make decisions for my customers. So when a customer comes to me and says, hey, I hate this setting, and I want you to reverse this setting, I tell them, yes, I will do it for you, but I simply need to make sure that you understand the risk that you're taking. And if you agree to take that risk, then that's your decision, and we'll follow along.
Yeah, we were talking, perfect, JD, I love that. Widgets are kind of interesting because they're basically a little portal that's presenting dynamic information continuously. And we were just talking before we switch gears here about 0-day and 1-day type of attacks. These could be an attack surface for by presenting dynamic content continuously. I don't know, at some point someone's
an executable embedded in there, and you click on the widget, it's gonna right. Ooh. So absolutely, all of these recommendations, not only operational security, but ultimately reduce the attack surface. So well said, Rich. Let's jump into this next setting. So we have 3 settings that are all going to talk about Windows Defender Smart Screen. So first, JD, if you don't mind just kind of tossing out what is smart screen? What does that mean? And then if we can dive into why CIS recommends to have this setting here enabled with a warn and prevent bypass.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because you look at smart screen, and I think today where you have smartphones and smart
Yep.
apps and smart everything.
This is the dynamic whiteboard on the wall, right? That's what we're talking about here.
Absolutely not, right? Smart screen is just what Microsoft has labeled, right? It's the name that they've given to their scanning software. So what Windows Defender Smart Screen is doing is it is screening, if you will, right? It's filtering through web content so if you go to a website, it filters through the content on that page and looks for something malicious, and then either blocks it or notifies you depending upon your settings. Or if you don't have anything set, it probably just lets it right on through.
Yeah, and I'll add too, Microsoft keeps this stuff current. That's why you want to do your patches. I mean, this stuff is updated on a continuous basis by Microsoft, and it will help you.
Yep. And one thing, as we've mentioned patching, right? One thing I really want to emphasize in the webinar is, I do have a difference between vulnerability management with the CVEs, patching with patch management. Hardening is almost this middle ground that the recommendations we talk about here today don't really change. When CIS went from V7 to V8, I believe there was, I think, 14 total changes we had to make with Senteon, whether we were adding settings or modifying a couple of recommendations. And not to say doing this all once and forgetting about it is going to be effective, because as we know from the webinar, these settings do drift. Applications change GPOs without telling you, and you need to be consistent with change tracking, reporting, enforcement, et cetera, right?
Good hygiene, just to kind of measure that drift continuously.
Yep, but a lot of these settings, unlike patching and vulnerability management, you really don't. You need to keep on maintaining, but the recommendation doesn't change. So, all right, let's go to this next setting here. And this one, again, I do maintain the order of the CIS benchmarks. Sometimes I come across these, and I'm like, why didn't CIS put this one first? But anyway, this setting here is simply saying Windows Defender Smart Screen needs to actually be enabled. And one thing I want to emphasize here is a lot of these GPOs do intermingle. In order to configure one, you must configure the other. So in that last setting, it's very, I'm assuming here, but I imagine we couldn't configure that to be warn and prevent bypass without first enabling this setting. So you already introduced Smart Screen, but JD, if you have anything more to say about this slide here, feel free.
Well, what I would say is that the good part of this is that there's some granularity here in your ability to harden the computer. So in other words, it's not just an on-off switch. It's either on or off. Smart Screen is either on and bypassed, or it's not. And Microsoft has actually given us some granularity so that we can do some different things. So you can either enable it with the bypass enabled or disabled.
Yep, I think that's really good. And the last setting here, before we switch pages from the Smart Screen, the one here is prevent bypassing Windows Defender Smart Screen prompts for sites is set to enabled. So this is forcing whether that's a legitimate end client, somewhere they shouldn't, right? This is preventing them, but more importantly, a bad actor. So why is it important to make sure they can't bypass at all?
So if Microsoft detects malicious code or something that they don't recognize, they don't like the way that it looks in that material, in that content on that website, they're going to throw up this warning and they're going to try to stop you from getting around it. The question here is do we allow the end user, do we allow our employees to say, oh, yeah, we don't care about that. Just go ahead and click on through the content and serve me up the virus anyway. So unfortunately,
like going to the slaughter. I don't know, JD.
Serve me up the virus.
The issue is that by nature, right? It's just human nature. We're going to click on things, and
who doesn't
we
love
want to see
clicking?
what we want to see, and we're just going to go ahead and click on that. This takes some of the guesswork out of that and hardens the system, prevents the end user from, say, shooting themselves in the foot, right? For lack of a better term.
Yeah.
That's actually a perfect term. A lot of these, you may be taking away capabilities from that end client, but it's capabilities one they shouldn't have had in the first place. Microsoft makes their systems very usable, right, by default.
I mean, if an end user has an issue with that, if they can bring a valid use case of why they need to click on, follow that link to a, uncertified DNS address or something, then go for it. But probably not going to work out too well.
And let's expand on that. We have about 15 minutes, and we're cruising through the slides. We have about 6 more, it looks like. But talking about an end client, maybe does hit something they're restricted to that they want to get to. How does that communication look like when end client's working with you? Do they submit a ticket? Do they have to email you? Like, do they call you angry? Like, how's that relationship look when they can't do something they want to do?
Usually that is what happens. They have to put in a ticket, whether they call us, email us, or go to our portal and enter a ticket through that. And they also know cell phones and different ways of contacting us. And
I was
yes,
going to say, JD, your oldest client, he probably stops over the house, I'm guessing.
No, my cell phone's out there. I let every customer know that if they have a problem, they can call me, and many do. And yes, they're sometimes angry. I mean, you get these calls where like, hey, I've got a Zoom call in 5 minutes, and I'm trying to install this update, or I'm trying to do this, or this thing just isn't working for me. And so then, but that's just part of the game.
Well, depending on the situation, people can be quite panicked, and depending on what comes across the screen, or, you were talking about very specifically if someone can't do something, but, there can be more incidents beyond that where, you're probably dealing with folks that, really need help quickly for various reasons, and you got to be there.
Sure. And we get an equal number of phone calls that are, oh, I got this email. I thought it was kind of a funny email, and I clicked on the link anyway, and now I'm not sure. So, it's human nature.
It's not going anywhere. And speaking of productivity settings, this next one here talks about, enables or disables Windows game recording and broadcasting is set to disabled. I can't imagine on a work machine they need to be live streaming their gaming, but again, education. So introduce this setting.
Well, again, I think it's pretty much that covers it. What you can read on the screen and what you just said, Zach. But
so many layers of wrong there.
But even away from the productivity side of it, it's actually a very dangerous setting for a company. Because, here's an employee working at their desk, and what if you're in a medical practitioner or, some other group that's under regulatory compliance, you have personally identifiable information of your customers, and you've got that open in the background, and you're like, I'm going to go on break, I'm going to pop this game open, and I'm going to play this multiplayer game, and you're broadcasting information. You could seriously be leaking that private information
without realizing it.
Yes, and there are many documented cases, maybe not specifically for playing World of Warcraft, right? But definitely for playing games or downloading music sharing apps and things like that. There are many documented cases of unintentional data breach by doing this.
Yep. Perfect. And let's go over to this next setting here. Ensure allow suggested apps in Windows Ink workspace is set to disabled. Now, personally, I haven't used the Windows Ink workspace. Could you introduce what that is, or have you used it?
I have not really used it myself, but I do know what it is. It's the app that allows you to use a pen on a Windows device that has a touch screen that can recognize the pen, and you can mark up things on your screen. I think just based on the nature of the benchmark that obviously they've built in some kind of ad capability that recommends you may want to try this app or this software or click on this link. Again, this is just going to be people.
The CIS controls really mandate, know your inventory. And, there's no better way of losing control of your inventory if people are just clicking on apps all the time.
Absolutely. And not to mention, you never know when you're going to run into a drive-by, where
Yep.
someone has appeared to legitimately rent ad space, but in reality, they're not a legitimate company at all, and they're injecting some form of malicious code into that link. And
Well,
if
there
they can
was just
attach
a
it,
an app that appeared in the app stores that it was it was for a crypto company. I forget the name, but it was a new mobile app for crypto company X. Download the app, put in your password, and you drain your whole wallet to a bad guy.
well, and
Beautiful things.
TikTok is an approved app, but there are,
Yeah,
and I'm not going to weigh in on whether it's true or not. I'm just saying there are many, many rumors and beliefs out there that's not a good software to be using.
I'm in that camp.
Could be American owned soon. We'll see how the next few months play out. But avoiding the TikTok deep dive, the next setting here is simply allowing the Windows Ink workspace. And thanks for introducing that. And this is one of the, I would say, more flexible or less standard recommendations CIS provides. They give a couple options, but most importantly, in that recommendation, they make sure it is not enabled on, but almost any other choice is acceptable. Thank you for introducing what the Ink Workspace was, but is there anything else to add towards this?
Yeah, I think the part to understand about this one is the part about the above lock. I believe what that's referring to is if you had a tablet or a laptop that had that touchscreen capability, that you could bring up the Windows Ink app without actually logging in. So you could make a quick note or mark up something very quickly. That's really kind of dangerous. You really just don't want to have that laptop or that tablet. It's a mobile device. You set it down at the airport or at a restaurant or something. You turn your back on it for a minute. You just don't want to give the hacker any opportunity to get past your lock screen. Again, it's a process like peeling the layers off of an onion. It's really just not good to allow that.
Yep. It's a perfect explanation. We got 3 more settings. We're making great time. This next one here is getting a little bit more technical here. Allow user control over installs is set to disabled. I know installing like the local Google Drive, you have the G Drive, right? So it is possible for your end clients to have multiple drives, but why don't we want users to have the ability to control where that install goes? Could you introduce that?
So we see this in a lot of different applications, and one of them would be something like if you just download a popular application like QuickBooks and it says, hey, you need to update QuickBooks, or you open up your browser and it says, hey, you need to update Firefox or Chrome. What we're really trying to do from a management perspective is to not teach end users that it's okay to click on yes to install something, because if you allow them to install something that's legitimate, then they'll ultimately click on yes and install something that's not legitimate. This setting is instrumental in kind of reducing the need for that education, right? Because this just blocks them from having the ability to install these things from the outset. So it's really a protection mechanism that keeps end users from accidentally installing viruses.
Tremendous risk mitigation with that one setting.
I always hear, I mean, I shouldn't say always anymore. I feel like the industry has matured a lot since Senteon was first developed, but I used to always hear, oh, I'm not going to prioritize changing a GPO. What risk is that actually mitigating? And that's actually was the driver for starting this webinar series. And
so much risk in that one alone.
Yeah, and I'm thankful to share, maybe this webinar series had an impact, but I don't really come to those conversations anymore. This concept of cyber hygiene, secure configuration management is I'm having to educate less when I'm talking to MSPs, which has been absolutely great and thankful, right? Thanks for attending, and thanks for just realizing the importance of these GPOs. All right, next setting here. Also one that you look at and you're probably like, well, that's a no-brainer, but always install with elevated privileges. CIS recommends to not allow. You mentioned privilege escalation earlier, but explain this setting.
Sure. So this is the setting that keeps IT people awake at night, and gives them nightmares when they do fall asleep. Um, the operating system recognizes that certain commands, certain functions that you want to do, certain types of software that you want to install should be thought about, right? That there's a difference between, installing a simple Microsoft Word, application versus, maybe installing something like an antivirus software, right? Where it's going to have more effect on your system. And so the operating system will then kick in and say, hey, we need administrator privileges in order to perform this. So we call it elevated privileges. You definitely do not ever want an end user to install something with elevated privileges. It's like a backdoor to allow the hackers to install even more powerful tools.
It eliminates a step from the attacker's kill chain or attack path, right? No, they no longer have to try to go. They got a foothold in a user machine. They now don't even need to get user to admin. The user profile can do what they wanted anyway. So it just
So
makes
one of
their
a
attack
golden
quicker.
ticket, you could say.
So very good here. And we got the last setting here. Prevent Internet Explorer security prompt for Windows installer scripts is set to disabled. Really quick, I always say this, reread, double read the GPOs. Prevent and disabled will require the security prompt. Be careful with these. Follow CIS. Do the one that highlights green in Senteon. But JD, please explain this setting for us.
Again, the double negative is always interesting, right? And requires reading 2 or 3 times to make sure that you understand what the setting is for. At the end of the day, what we're talking about here is different types of code, different types of websites. Try to run scripts, which are chains of commands that will execute on your computer and perform certain steps. You do not want out of the box default to just allow these scripts to run without some kind of prompt or notification that says, wow, you clicked on this and we're going to run a script in the background. Are you sure that you really wanted us to run that script?
That's perfect. And that was the last setting here. So if we can highlight JD here, I do like to leave the last couple minutes available. I do my best, right? It's always hard to budget. I'm always facilitating and doing my best. But JD,
Can I say one thing first?
Oh, please, Rich, go ahead.
Awesome job, JD. Super nice meeting
Thank
you.
you.
Love your style and your approach and your insights today. Thank you so much for joining us. Great job.
Well, thank
Absolutely.
you. And I want to say thanks to CIS for creating these benchmarks. A really good theory for cybersecurity risk mitigation is to understand that, if you take care of the little things, you can really handle the big things. So the big things will take care of themselves.
Yes.
It's the attention to detail on the little things that matter. Maybe it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
I think that's perfect. And this feels a little iterative, like me asking this, but I wanted to say, hey, any closing thoughts? But that might be the closing thought. But to give you one more opportunity, is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with today outside of an ounce of the effort on the little things can add up to pounds of results? I mean, is there anything else you want to leave with us today?
The last thing I want to let everyone know out there is that cybersecurity is a huge problem. It affects every company and every person across the globe. If your business is not taking any kind of cybersecurity steps now, I highly recommend that you seek out a trusted professional cybersecurity company and get some advice. At least find out where you're at on that journey and see if there's anything else that you need to do to protect your company from these criminals who, again, are very adept at using technology to steal from all of us.
Call them what they are. They really are criminals, just in a way we're not used to, right? It doesn't have to be in person to be a criminal. Well done, JD. Thank you again for being here. So Kind of summarizing the presentation here with how to watch. We are here weekly. We may or may not be taking a break to prep the browser profiles. I'm still determining my bandwidth and Rich's sailing schedule. So we will see how that plays out. But we do have 3 more guests coming up with Heath Spencer, Corey White, and Tim Schnur. Really excited to get closing up on these soon enough. That will say some browser settings in there. So we are here every week at 1 p.m. Eastern on LinkedIn Live, and we are doing YouTube Live as well. We do have our CIS benchmark newsletter series where I do try to summarize these episodes and provide some deep dives into the content. So please like and subscribe there. Connect with me and Rich. We're always happy here. And JD, if you haven't, feel free to toss your LinkedIn into the chat, into the comment section on LinkedIn. That'd be great. And as always, summing up and next steps here on LinkedIn, but also Senteon is here as a promotion and gift to the MSP market. We want you to do an assessment. JD introduced this earlier. Showing an assessment is a great way to break into that conversation and get into the important things. And over at Senteon, we want you to do this and take advantage of it for free. So see where you sit today with the CIS benchmarks, show it to a customer, see how that conversation goes. But again, thank you for joining us. And